Hey, it's Ramsey Dewey over here in Shanghai, China. Welcome to another edition of Q&A with the Coach. Today, let's read some questions from the viewers. This first one comes from Optimistic Gamers, who says, "Hey Ramsey, I got a question. How do I explain to people what MMA is and why people do it and love it?" Oh man, that's a great question. Love it so much. The reason I selected this question, it reminded me so much when I first got here to China. And I opened up the first MMA gym in Shanghai, the second publicly available MMA gym in the entire country of China. And nobody here, except for a very small handful, literally small handful of people that you could count on two hands, knew what MMA was. And so trying to sell memberships, trying to get people in the doors, trying to make enough money to keep the lights on was like pulling teeth. And people would ask, they'd be intrigued. Why do you do this? What's this all about? What's the point of this? Why do we need this when we have boxing? Why does this exist when there is Muay Thai? What's the point? And those can be difficult questions to field when somebody doesn't really get it, because we're only able to see what we already know. Did you know that? You can only see what you already know. We think seeing is believing, and that's absolutely not true. Believing is seeing. The opposite is true. Here's what I mean by that. Without the context of experience, we cannot physically perceive a new experience. Try watching the UFC with somebody who's never seen an MMA fight before, somebody who doesn't know what grappling is. What happens? What happens when the fight goes to the ground? Almost always. They'll say, "Wow, why don't they fight? Why are they just hugging? Stand them up, ref." Something like that. That's a pretty normal reaction from a non-grappler. In stark contrast, watch that same fight with some students of jiu-jitsu, with some wrestlers, with some skilled submission grapplers. And when the fight goes to the ground, you'll get some very different comments. They will comment on the technical aspects of what is happening. They will comment if it is good grappling. "Oh, that was beautiful. Look at that transition right there. Oh man, get the underhook." You know, they'll be shouting these comments at the screen as they watch. They'll be engaged in this moment in a way that your friend who's never grappled simply cannot, because he can't see it. He can't see the technique because he has no context for experience. You may or may not have heard this old story, which may or may not be true, about Columbus when he came to the Americas for the first time. And the natives purportedly were unable to see the three ships of Columbus until they got aboard the ships and felt them with their hands and saw what the ships were able to do. Oh, I get it. These are sailing vessels. They float on the water. Because the natives had never seen a sailing vessel. They didn't use them. They didn't build them. They lack that context of experience. So whether that is a true story or not, it still teaches that important, valuable lesson. We can only see what we already know. We can only see and perceive what we already believe. I could illustrate this point many ways. Many ways. People get in a car crash. They've never been in a car crash before. What do they usually say? "That guy came out of nowhere. I didn't see it." And they're being honest. They didn't see the guy coming. They didn't see. Otherwise, they would have moved. They would have done everything in their power to avoid it. But they didn't have that context of experience. Take a speed bag, for example. Moves really fast. Too fast for the human eye to perceive. And you can move your hands around pretty quick too, right? But in order to track that bag, we've got to do something besides just looking at it with our eyes. Our eyes aren't fast enough. We have to train our senses, our sense of timing, our other senses of perception. And we need to develop a context of experience. I know that if my hand is here at this specific time, the bag will be there. I know when I pull the hand back, the bag will be here, and so on. At this specific time, in these specific intervals, in this specific context. But without that experience, You go to the speed bag for the first time, you start hitting it, what happens? It flops all over the place, and you don't know what you're doing, and you feel like, this is impossible. I can't do this. So how do you explain MMA to people who don't see MMA? They see two monkeys in a cage dancing around. They see some nonsense, man. I remember I made a technique video recently about escaping full mount, one of the most dangerous positions in a fight to be in. You're on the bottom. This other person is pinning you on top. They're sitting on you in a position where they have two free hands, two free elbows, free head for headbutts, whatever. They can beat the crap out of you from there. They can kill you from there. And if you can't escape from there, you could quite literally die. And I showed some mount escape, some very effective methods to transition, to get out of that position. And most of the comments were constructive and positive, like, hey, thanks for those tips. I'm going to try those out. And then a lot of them were just kind of strange, like sexualized, like, it looks like you're in a sexual position because two people in close contact with each other. Ew, gross. And that tells me something about your context for experience, if that's what you're seeing. Probably tells me you're watching some filthy pornography on the internet and you need to stop, because that's your context of experience for human contact. So get off the internet, get out there and train and learn how to grapple. That tells me you don't know anything about grappling, and if you ended up in a position like that, you'd get yourself killed. So buck up, campers, change your lives. Now, some people will never get it. They will never appreciate what you appreciate, and that's okay. That's totally fine. Everybody is entitled to do what they love. And if you love cage fighting, cool. More power to you. I do too. But a lot of people don't. Again, going back to that mount escape video, I remember this certain comment, a guy said, "This is obscene. This is obscene. They're touching each other. They're in close contact." Ah. So some people just simply cannot handle the idea of close human contact in a fight. I think that's one of the reasons why so many people are much more willing to sign up for a boxing match than an MMA fight. If you look at the sheer numbers of people willing to do a boxing match versus an MMA fight, it's kind of staggering. Even though, in my opinion, boxing is a much more dangerous sport with a much higher, steeper learning curve. Yes, there are more techniques available in MMA, but there are more ways to win. There are more ways to limit the number of variables in your favor. There are more ways to play your strengths against your opponent's weaknesses. Whereas in boxing, there's one way to win, and that is to be really good at boxing. And that's really hard. Whereas in MMA, if you suck at boxing, but you're good at wrestling, and you're good at submissions, you still stand a pretty good chance of beating the guy who lacks that skill set. And that's what's really compelling about it to me is the rock, paper, scissors aspect of MMA. I got some really interesting questions. I got one from, I forget the dude's name, but he gave me this hypothetical situation, and I often get these really crazy questions. Coach, who do you think would win in a fight, Spider-Man or Batman, or some silly hypothetical question like that? And I enjoy those. I enjoy speculating on fictional fights and all that. I got a whole playlist of fantastic fictional fight scenes that I break down, and that's okay. But my day job, my actual day job, I'm an MMA coach and I train people to win fights, so I really appreciate the questions about real-world hypotheticals. And this guy said, basically, who would win in a fight? A guy who is really skilled at boxing and wrestling, or a guy who's really skilled at kickboxing and jiu-jitsu. And I said, finally! Finally, a hypothetical question based in reality, and I think the way I termed my answer, the way I worded that, didn't translate very well. And our friend got offended. He thought I was being sarcastic. I was not. So if that's the case, I apologize. When I write you comments, I hope you don't take them the wrong way and think I'm being mean-spirited or anything like that. If I write an exclamation point, for example, that's simply to emphasize a point more. Anyway, so I love that question a lot. Who would win in that fight? Well, I mean, there are a ton of other variables in a fight, which is what makes it so compelling. But based on those variables alone, good boxing, good wrestling versus good kickboxing and good jiu-jitsu. All right, let's assume fighter A, the boxer-wrestler, knows nothing about kicking and nothing about jiu-jitsu. And the guy over here on this side, kickboxer and jiu-jitsu guy, he's going to be inferior in the offensive aspects of striking and grappling. Hear me out. Jiu-jitsu and kickboxing are the defensive aspects of striking. Boxing and wrestling are striking and grappling. Boxing and wrestling are the offensive aspects of striking and grappling. And so we pit those two against each other. If I were to place a bet, I'd place the bet on the offensive guy. Why? Because effective offense is what wins a fight. Effective striking, effective grappling, and effective ring control or cage control or effective aggressiveness, okay? And that's really compelling to me. Now that fight could go all kinds of different ways, and we can cite tons of examples where a guy who was predominantly a jiu-jitsu fighter beat the wrestler and vice versa, etc., ad nauseum, right? But those are interesting questions to me. That's my job, to make informed decisions based on predictive behavior in order to help my fighters have the highest chance possible winning fights. Okay, so you don't need to sell me on MMA. I'm already sold. I'm the salesman, if you will. But a lot of people out there think it sucks, or they refuse to watch it, or they liken it to something like human cockfighting, or they just find it boring. And that's okay. You don't have to love MMA. It would be great if we all loved the same things, right? Or would it? Would it? Actually, it would be kind of boring if we all loved the same things. We would live in a pretty bland world. I don't think I'd like that very much. A lot of people are shocked when they learn that I'm willing to have a conversation with you, even if I don't agree with you. Every day I get a comment, dozens of comments, from people saying essentially, they feel the need to let me know how much of my statements they agree with and disagree with. Well, I don't agree with everything that you say. But, and then they'll concede a point or something like that. And that's a weird way to have a conversation, in my opinion. Obviously, you don't agree with everything that I say or believe, otherwise you would be me and I would be you. And that's ridiculous. It's not what we're here for. We're here for me to be me and you to be you, right? All right. So what do you do for your friends that you want to convince to watch MMA and they won't, and they don't, and they can't? That's okay. Let them be. But at the same time, go out there and keep talking about what you love with new people. Not saying dump your old friends and make some new ones, just make some new ones too. And then eventually, you're going to find people who also love what you love. And it's good to hang out with those people too. Thanks for watching. Get out there and train.